There are moments in sport when everything stops, when the conversation shifts away from point standings, pit strategy, and Sunday rivalries, and becomes something far more human, something far more painful. The NASCAR world is living through one of those moments right now, because over the past several days, details have been emerging that are forcing an entire sport to ask itself some very uncomfortable questions. Questions about warning signs, questions about decisions made during the brutal grind of a long season, and most painfully, questions about how far a competitor will push through suffering before someone finally steps in and says enough is enough. What makes this story so heavy is that people close to the situation are now suggesting this did not happen completely out of nowhere. There were symptoms. There were signs. And looking back, those signs feel impossible to ignore. We're talking about Kyle Busch, a two-time Cup Series champion, one of the most polarizing, electrifying, and genuinely talented drivers NASCAR has seen in the modern era. A driver who made every single race feel different the moment he strapped into the car. Whether you loved him or rooted against him every Sunday, you watched when Kyle Busch was on track. That was simply the effect he had on the sport. And now, the conversation surrounding the final days before his medical emergency has shifted into something deeply emotional and deeply uncomfortable for everyone connected to racing. According to multiple reports, Kyle Busch had been dealing with persistent coughing, breathing discomfort, and worsening respiratory symptoms for several days leading into race weekend. Sources close to the situation have described symptoms that were clearly visible and increasingly concerning, not subtle background noise, but signs that something was genuinely wrong. Despite this, Busch reportedly continued fulfilling team responsibilities, including simulator sessions connected to Richard Childress Racing. That's where things reportedly became terrifying. Multiple outlets have reported that Busch was later found unresponsive after simulator work, leading to immediate hospitalization. Doctors later confirmed complications tied to pneumonia, complications that eventually progressed into sepsis. That word, sepsis, has shaken a lot of people in this sport, because sepsis is not a slow-moving condition. Once an infection spreads aggressively through the body, the situation can escalate rapidly and with very little warning. For someone pushing through fatigue and illness in the middle of a demanding competition schedule, the window for intervention can close faster than anyone expects. And that's where the larger conversation begins. Because anyone who has followed NASCAR for any length of time understands the culture that exists inside this sport. Drivers race hurt. Drivers race exhausted. Drivers hide symptoms and push through illness because missing races carries real consequences. Playoff positioning, sponsorship relationships, team momentum, public perception. The entire structure of the Cup Series season creates enormous pressure to keep showing up, no matter what. That mentality has always been admired in racing. Toughness is celebrated. A driver who races through pain is praised as a competitor. A driver who steps back from the car is questioned. That culture runs deep, and it runs through every level of the sport, from the drivers themselves to the teams surrounding them. But when you hear the specific details of what happened here, respiratory distress over multiple days, worsening symptoms, pneumonia, and ultimately sepsis, suddenly that culture feels less like strength and more like a blind spot. The family's perspective. The family's comments are what really intensified this conversation. A representative speaking on behalf of the Busch family stated publicly that they believe stronger intervention should have happened once symptoms continued deteriorating. They specifically questioned whether enough urgency was shown after Busch reportedly sought medical attention following a recent event. According to the family, this situation should not have been treated as simply a personal decision left entirely on the driver. That statement landed hard, because it puts a direct challenge on the table, not just for Richard Childress Racing, but for how NASCAR as a sport handles the health of competitors during the season. Richard Childress Racing responded with a statement of their own, and their position deserves to be understood clearly as well. The organization stated that Kyle remained heavily involved in deciding whether he could continue fulfilling his obligations. They emphasized that he wanted to keep going, because that was who he was as a competitor, his entire identity built around not backing down. RCR also stated that they encouraged him to seek medical care while ultimately respecting his wishes as an adult and a professional. This is where the debate inside NASCAR has become genuinely complicated. Because both sides are making arguments rooted in real truth. Kyle Busch was a veteran, a champion, a grown man with decades of professional experience. Respecting his autonomy as a competitor is a legitimate position. At the same time, when someone's health is visibly declining over multiple days, when respiratory symptoms are worsening rather than improving, the question of whether a team has a deeper responsibility becomes very hard to avoid. This story has sparked a much wider conversation about how serious illness is handled during the Cup Series season. Right now, NASCAR has extensive and well-developed protocols around concussions, crash evaluations, and physical injuries sustained during on-track incidents. The sport has made real progress in those areas over the years. But what about illnesses? What about a driver who is visibly deteriorating from a respiratory infection over the course of several days? What about the pressure, spoken or unspoken, to keep showing up regardless of how someone actually feels? There are no formal protocols today that address situations like this with the same structure and authority as post-crash medical evaluations. And that gap is now something the entire garage is talking about. Fans across NASCAR have been asking whether teams should have more authority or more responsibility to intervene when a driver's health is clearly declining. Whether the culture of toughness needs some kind of counterbalance. Whether the people around an athlete have an obligation that goes beyond simply respecting what that athlete says they want to do. Situations like this force everyone to confront something that gets lost in the weekly noise of competition. These are human beings first. The points, the rivalries, the manufacturer battles, all of it matters right up until the moment it suddenly doesn't. For someone like Kyle Busch, whose entire identity was built around intensity and refusal to back down, whose reputation was earned by outworking everyone and outlasting everything, the idea of stepping back was probably genuinely unthinkable. That mentality is what made him one of the greatest drivers of his generation. But it's also a mentality that can make a person invisible to their own limits. No formal investigation has been announced. That is important to state clearly. There has been no official accusation of wrongdoing. Richard Childress Racing has publicly defended how they handled the situation. But the questions are not going away. Because once people hear that symptoms were present for days, once they hear that medical attention was reportedly sought and the situation continued escalating, once they hear the word sepsis, those questions demand to be asked. Could more have been done sooner? That is the question NASCAR is sitting with right now. And whether or not anyone agrees on the answer, this moment feels like one the sport will carry with it for a long time. Not as a headline, not as a controversy, but as a genuine reckoning with what it means to protect the people who make this sport what it is. The hope now is that something real and lasting comes from it. Stronger protocols, clearer responsibilities, a culture that still celebrates toughness, but knows when toughness becomes something else entirely. Kyle Busch spent his entire career refusing to let anything stop him. The least this sport can do is make sure his story leads to changes that protect the next generation of competitors who carry that same fire.